As I mentioned recently, I was stuck doing mandatory corporate and OSHA safety training at my job last weekend. Despite my complaints on Twitter, it was actually an interesting moment to sit and observe to see just about everyone who works within our small organization. So I thought I would take the time to give it another shot at telling a story, since the last piece had been so well received. As I've mentioned, I work for a small transit group, and I'll leave it at that without risk of being doxxed. All of our drivers, mainly boomer retirees, Social Security income recipients, and that one late 30-something that makes me wonder about what kind of life choices he made. It of course began with mandatory introductions, and ones that we didn't even have to give ourselves. It was a roll call of sorts wherein no one said a word but we simply stood up. An odd sort of deal, but I suppose skipping the niceties, since we're all here on a Saturday morning, was probably the gentle mercy we could count on as we got through the day and began. Of course, we're all here on a Saturday, so let's just go ahead and get it over with, was my initial line of thinking. Yet, we're stuck here for at least 4 hours, if not more, and it was more. My mind wandered on how to make the most of it. Here I was, the only person in the entire organization under 30. Gives one a chance to observe very real boomers, not just the phrase and lingo we use to call anyone over 30, or really just anyone older than us. Odd how such a term for a generation that is slowly now dying out has been rebirthed from its generational constraints to a world of socio-political linguistics. Although, with someone who does have plenty of baby boomer family members, I wonder if that will still be true once they're long gone from cultural memory. Perhaps someone 100 years from now will look up the swanky words of the 2020s like we did of the 1920s and try to bring back boomer into the vogue from the archives of digital esotericism. As I've mentioned before, living out in a much more rural and smaller part of the country, the stereotype did bleed through a little of what you would expect for such a crowd. Older men, most of them somewhat overweight, a few rail thin, wearing stereotypical trucker-stop conservative t-shirts, adorned with the dark blues and blacks with patriotic slogans, and other sorts of what I could only really call biker gang-style adornments. Although, if I'm being honest, I can't blame them for love of one's country or ideals. They grew up in a world vastly different than the one I've inherited from them. When it comes to the issue of screaming incessantly, "I hate boomers," as if I'm surrounded by them, quite literally this time, like I hate the Antichrist meme, I can't help but think of the trope that you see when the villain monologues. You know, we're not so different, you and I. Yes, they did certainly live under a much better social and cultural tradition than we do now. I won't dispute the role that came with them simply allowing their elites of the day to put us on the track we are on now. Yet, I can't help but think that so much of the millennial and zoomer attitudes imbued within ourselves come from them. We rage with quote tweets, replies, and making videos into the void, just as they yelled at their newspapers, radio stations, and television sets. We enjoy our favorite personalities and engage in the parasocial relationship with our favorite accounts and content creators, just as they do and have done with people like Rush Limbaugh or Jim Bakker. These may seem superficial, but I do think that in some behavioral context that it runs deep within the American culture and that has now permeated well into the post-war generations of the baby boomers. I didn't expect to take in this generational observation during this time, but it couldn't help but stick out like a sore thumb. Aside from the younger man who is mid to late 30s, there was at least a very real 30-year age gap between me and most of the drivers. Hell, there's at least a 20-some-odd year age gap between myself and everyone I work with in the office. Depending on your generational classification, I'm 26, it makes for a very odd place to be in, at least in relations to others. Or so I thought initially. They're more with the times than one might initially realize. For instance, my manager and co-workers whom I directly interact with, most of them have a TikTok account to watch videos, mainly for comedians or short clips of things that amuse them. I mean, don't we do the same with our own interests? Although I would hope not on that god-awful app. Yet, as we were rushing through the local training for our facilities and knowing where the fire exits are and the rest, things went to the corporate training, and that's what we were required to go on to. For me, the internet right-wing brain turned on like a Pavlovian response in the same way that one might say if they saw a statistic that had 13% in there somewhere. This is certainly a product of being on the internet too much, or maybe it's me just following Steve Saylor on Twitter. Either which way, my brain went loose on watching the numerous videos about safe driving distances and the numerous errors operators, which I suppose is a nicer way of being called a bus driver, causing collisions or not being attentive at the wheel. It was a stunning amount of diversity on display, and even when blurred around the face, the rest of it gave it all away with who the person was. All the while, a short, bald white guy with the scuffiest mic imaginable is commenting on how to be a better operator. I cannot make this up, and I have to do this training annually, and I work in the office. There's just something about what I'm watching through ever so attentively, not because I'm learning something, but because my politically addled brain is just enjoying the pattern recognition. Perhaps this was the most humorous highlight of the day, one of which made almost forgive the fact that I was there from 8 a.m. till 1:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. To be honest, when the idea came for writing up this little piece, I had thought that this was going to be the much bigger focus of what it was, but it slowly found its way fading to the back as some kind of humorous anecdote and nothing more. But despite the tech issues of waiting on videos or slides to load, lunch being delayed, the majority of this felt like a waste of common sense outside of the local. The locks for the drivers, the leaks, the chemical list documents in case someone's injured, things that would directly affect our day-to-day operations. It is not like OSHA or what is being done at the corporate level ever felt like it was truly covering anything, and what was done felt more like a poorly done piece of product placement advertising than anything else. Even then, the Intel Corporation owns that product. It's not like it's from an independent or small business or anything, but I suppose that's par for the course with such a large institution that runs us. Risk aversion, writ large, feels like a great inhibition from the common sense and the daring men we once had in the past. Someone look at the famous image I have below, and comment if you can tell me just how many OSHA violations there are. No, seriously, I'm curious. Risk aversion is the logical conclusion to that old John Stuart Mill idea of the harm principle. Or at least that's what it appears to be that way. I'm no political theorist, but a mere observer no matter how much I try and read. We are both legally repressed by the chance and no war to have great things be created, but we are also not the same caliber of men that once were those day-to-days working on these skyscrapers with their cup of joe in hand, and their lunches now packed with them, working on the great towers of industry in Babylon of the 20th century. And now, our urban sprawl no longer reaches upward on time and on budget, but now is left muddled by the politics and the bureaucracy of men and women with no real understanding of how to get things done. There is corruption, just as there was corruption over a century ago in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, but we no longer have the titans and swindlers of a Thomas C. Durant, and now it is some appropriating committee or some hapless Twitter activist sitting on some city council. Even our 21st century robber barons, like that of Elon Musk, cannot even build a simple tunnel, whilst tweeting away to hide bad news on his companies or using his meme status to manipulate the market for his own personal wealth. As my father once said, no one gets wealthy ethically. But the day finally came to an end with gift cards and a crowd of boomers lost in the cigarette smoke in the parking lot, as the few millennials and Gen Xers drove off in their cars for the rest of their Saturday afternoon. I stayed in town and waited until evening vespers had came for service. So the next time that you're stuck in one of these training opportunities or courses, do take the chance to look around. Odds are you won't learn anything from the material, but you will learn the state of your cohorts and what's been lost as a people. And if you want to think more about these kinds of things, well, stick around, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Be prudent, everyone.